The terrain warning went off in the dark, that hard synthetic voice filling the flight deck, telling us the ground was coming up, and we firewalled the power and went around and climbed away and came back and landed the second time clean. Everyone walked off that airplane. Everyone was fine. And 3 days later, in a room with the chief pilot, they told me the whole thing had been my mistake. I was the first officer on that flight. I was the one who'd been calling the approach, watching it go low and fast, saying the words you're trained to say when an approach isn't right. And now I was sitting across a table being told that I mismanaged the descent, that I was slow on my callouts, that I was the reason an airplane full of people got a terrain warning in the dark. I'd been flying for 15 years. Thousands of hours. And in 15 years the thing I was known for was being precise, flying it exactly by the numbers, calling what I saw, never letting an approach get away from me. That's the whole job of a good first officer. You are the second set of eyes and the voice that says stop when something's wrong. Precise. That was the whole thing I sold. Precise was the only thing I ever sold. And in one review, I was the pilot who nearly put an airplane into the ground. I want to tell you about the man who did that to me. His name was Hollis, and he was the captain. A captain is the pilot in command. On that flight deck his word carried the weight, and outside of it, it carried even more. He was senior. He was connected. He'd been at that airline longer than some of the people who'd be judging what happened. And that night Hollis was in a hurry. We had a slot to make, and he wanted the airplane on the ground. And instead of flying a stable approach, he rushed the descent. And he clicked off the autopilot at a point in the approach where you do not click it off. And he pushed us down low and fast trying to salvage it. And I did my job. I called it. I called that we were not stabilized. I called the sync rate. And when it went past the point where procedure says you do not continue, I called for the go-around. Out loud. On time. By the book. He didn't take it. He kept pressing toward the runway, chasing that slot, until the airplane itself screamed at us about the terrain and forced the go-around. He should have flown when I called for it. And the second we were safe on the ground, Hollis's story was already made. He didn't tell them he'd rushed an unstable approach and flown through a first officer's go-around call. He told the airline, and then he told the FAA, that his first officer mismanaged the descent and was slow on the callouts. He pointed across the flight deck. At me. Here is what that costs a pilot like me. It is not just the job. A finding that I caused an unstable approach and a near-terrain event follows my certificate. The FAA can take action on it. And in this industry, a mark like that follows your name to every airline you'd ever want to fly for. 15 years, and flying is the only thing I have ever wanted to do or known how to do. And a captain with seniority and friends telling that story first is a very hard thing for a first officer to talk her way out of. I drove home that night a 41-year-old woman who'd been told she might lose the only career she'd ever had for the mistake of the man in the other seat. My daughter asked me why I looked like that. I told her something scary happened at work and someone said it was my fault and that I was going to prove it wasn't. I said it out loud, so I'd have to go do it. The flight attendants had heard the tension on that flight deck. But they couldn't testify to airspeeds and descent rates and who clicked off what, and I wasn't going to hang my whole career on somebody's impression of a mood. This wasn't going to get fixed by whose account sounded more senior. It was going to get fixed by the two things on that airplane that record everything and don't care who's the captain. Because here is what Hollis forgot, the way these people always forget the one thing. That airplane is recording the whole flight. There's a flight data recorder in the tail, hundreds of parameters, our airspeed, our altitude, our descent rate, whether the autopilot was on or off, every control input, all of it, continuously, stamped in time. The airline runs a flight data program that captures the same numbers off every single flight we fly. And there's a cockpit voice recorder that captures every word said on that flight deck. The airplane does not care about the slot time, and it does not care that Hollis is the captain. It just records what happened and whose hands were doing it. So through the investigation, and with my union pushing, they read the recorders out. The flight data. The flight deck audio. And they put them on one timeline, the 90 seconds of that approach, side by side. The data showed the approach going unstable because the descent was rushed and the autopilot came off at the wrong point. The flight data recorder showed the control inputs during that unstable segment, and they were the captain's, not mine. And the voice recorder, the part one didn't even need, but I will be grateful for the rest of my life. The voice recorder had me. It had me calling unstabilized. It had me calling the sync rate. It had me calling go around, clearly, on time, at exactly the point the book says to call it. And it had Hollis pressing on until the airplane's own warning made the decision for him. The recorders had flown that approach right alongside us. And the recorders said the first officer called for the go-around and the captain flew through it. They held the review in a conference room at the training center. The chief pilot was there. The FAA inspector was there. Hollis was there, in his uniform, still sure that a captain's word beats a first officer's, the way it usually does. My rep put the flight data trace and the voice recorder on the timeline together, and we didn't argue. We played the 90 seconds. The rushed descent. The autopilot coming off. The captain's inputs. And then my voice, calling every deviation, calling the go-around, ignored, until the terrain warning. The FAA inspector asked Hollis one question. He asked him why, when his first officer called for a go-around at the correct point, the airplane kept descending. Hollis didn't have an answer, because the answer was in his own hands on the data and my own voice on the tape. The flight attendants confirmed how tense that deck had been. And I watched it land on Hollis in front of the chief pilot and the federal inspector. The moment he understood that the airplane had been recording the whole time, and the airplane doesn't feel the schedule and doesn't care who wears the fourth stripe. They cleared me completely. My certificate was never really in danger once the recorders were read out. The data had me flying it right and calling it right. I went back on the line, with the back pay, and a finding on the record that the first officer acted correctly and called for the go-around that the captain failed to fly. The airline reinforced the rule that matters most. When the first officer calls go-around, the airplane goes around, full stop, no matter who's in the left seat. The flight attendants were supported and never made to feel they'd imagined it. And Hollis was pulled off the line, faced an FAA action on his own certificate, and answered for the rushed approach he'd tried to hang on me, the same career-ending mark he'd reached for first. I still fly the line. Right seat, same callouts, same numbers, and I still call go around the instant an approach isn't right, and I have never once been sorry I did. And sometimes on a night approach, everything's stable and configured and exactly where it should be. I think about how the whole time they were calling me the pilot who nearly crashed an airplane. The thing that was going to save me was recording quietly in the tail, keeping every number and every word. I built 15 years on flying it by the numbers. It turned out the airplane had been keeping those numbers right along with me.